Hello and welcome. My name is Cliona Foley and this is Off the Bench, a podcast about women's sport which we hope will educate and entertain sports fans of all genders and ages. You can find all our previous episodes on iTunes or at offtheball.com. Go into their podcast series link and you'll find Off the Bench. I'm joined this evening by sports journalist Sinead Farrell and by Oisin Langan of this parish and commentating and a lot of other things. There's many strings to his bows. But Oisin, it's been an extraordinary few weeks. The first thing we have to say is Christina Aguilera was seen outside on the street outside this very offices yesterday in what looked like a Sligo tracksuit, and Ireland were in a World Cup. Which of those is more extraordinary?
I would have to say Ireland's performance in the World Cup. Christina Aguilera, look, I respect your singing and all that, but good luck. The only show in town over the last couple of weeks has been the Irish hockey team. And the only show in town for them, the team itself, both collectively and individually, has been this Hockey World Cup over the last number of weeks, months and years, because the work they had to put in and the sacrifice they had to make to get there in the first place was pretty amazing. Then the actual work they had to put into preparing for the World Cup, that was pretty amazing. I do feel very bad for, you know, the fringe squad players who made massive sacrifices and didn't quite make the squad in the end, and that's elite sport. It's really, really cruel. So we're looking at the glory of what they achieved. I guess if you're a player who was pretty close to it but didn't quite get into the squad, there's a kind of a weirdness going on at the moment. You kind of feel good but feel bad.
Yeah, for those,
but
if anybody, a group of like 5 or 6 players who we have come to know in the last week as well, and they'll become synonymous with the hockey team, but they could be walking down the street with one of those fringe players and people won't know them. The other person.
You're right, Sinead. Interestingly enough, at the homecoming on Dame Street a few days ago, and we're talking about the Irish Women's Hockey World Cup team, in case anybody who's listening has been under a rock and doesn't know that they won the silver medals at the Hockey World Cup. They brought up a few of the fringe players because they spotted them in the crowd and they brought them up onto the crowd with them, which was lovely. You said to me before we started, Oisin, that you said sports sometimes is like an iceberg, and a lot of the time as the public we only see the tip and we don't see most of the body underneath and all of the work that goes underneath, and you were saying that's what really strikes you about this team. And
that's the powerful part, the part underneath the water. That's the part that sunk the Titanic, and we lost poor Leo because of it, but DiCaprio, not Varadkar, just to clarify. But yeah, like we don't see the stuff that makes elite sports people. We only see what they do on the pitch, and that is the result of what they do. So like these players, most of them had full-time jobs, most of them have careers. You spoke to a few of them.
We had before. 3 of them in here in our last episode, if anybody wants to look up it and have a look at it.
Exactly, and they outlined exactly what they had to do to get to the World Cup, to prepare for the World Cup, and to be as prepared as the professional teams or the teams who are paid to play hockey, because their attitude is totally professional. I don't like referring to them as amateur because they're not amateur. They're maybe unpaid for this, or it's not their career, or it's not like what they derive the benefit or the bulk of their income from. But they are very, very professional, and they're more professional than the professionals, if that makes any sense, because they have to be more dedicated.
Exactly.
They don't live the lifestyle. They don't get the rest opportunities, and that's a key thing, I think, with professional stroke amateur athletes in any sport.
It's nearly harder to be the amateur doing the professional job because you're trying to juggle it with other things.
Exactly.
For context, we should say they were beaten in the final by the team that had won 8 of the previous World Cups.
7.
7 was it? 7 or 8? Won their 8th. They're only the 6th country to ever contest with the Women's Hockey World Cup. So that gives us some context. There was a lot of talk about money, Sinead, and there's a lot of talk now, and it's almost like what happens automatically in Ireland is we have success and then everybody starts squabbling about it. What have you taken out of the conversation since, if you like, and maybe what needs to be done now?
Well, the players have said it themselves, they don't want this to be just a once-off. And that is a danger. And I was on News Talk during the week and I was talking about this, and even in the immediate few weeks after it happens, attentions are going to go to other sports. The All-Ireland finals will be coming up in the next few weeks. Hockey is in danger of going down the pecking order quite quickly because there's such a surge, such a swell of public interest right now, but it's trying to sustain that because this is a sport that is kind of confined to World Cups like that, Olympics cycles, and Olympic sports. They're only fresh for so long, and then it kind of goes back into the background. And the other sports that are kind of annual and have things that are happening every couple of weeks, they take over again.
And by their own understanding and admission, you know, it's a sport that's largely played in 4 cities probably, and doesn't have a strong presence in Connacht, and is played a lot at school. But then, because there isn't a huge club structure or a massive national league, you know, people don't filter into it in adult. But that's the challenge now. There was talk very quickly, Oisin, of 2 things. One, this appeared 1.5 million that seemed to have mysteriously appeared to fund some things in sport, and the minister says, it was down the back. That's where it must have been, Sinead, going behind the back of the couch. He says some of it will go to hockey, and secondly, a big talk immediately of build a national centre. I mean, what do you make of those conversations?
That national pitch has been needed for a couple of years now. I mean, that's been a real issue, and it would be a great venue if they were to put a suitable pitch in UCD. The stadium is there, probably needs a little bit of work.
They're rebuilding the one in UCD is my understanding at the moment.
Yeah, but that needs to get done pretty quickly, because you need a base to support this team from, and they need a base to play as well. At the moment, they can't play a massive game in Ireland because there is no standard pitch. Now, can you imagine the Irish soccer team in 1990 if they weren't able to play games in Ireland immediately after the World Cup? Or
they did play challenge games beforehand, but it's a question of having a game that had an
But you couldn't play a qualifier. You couldn't play a high-grade game. So that needs to be done, and that's something that has needed to be done for a while. Hopefully this will provide a push regards, you know, getting a sponsor in, the funding.
They got a sponsor, and my understanding, interestingly enough, about the sponsor is that the sponsor, my understanding is, well, first of all, we know the sponsor only came in just ahead of the World Cup, and they struggled for a long time to get it, as does the women's team. And secondly, my understanding is, a rumour has it that the sponsor has got them for less than 50k, which is a phenomenal return.
It's an absolutely amazing return. But when I say sponsor, I mean just generally.
For Irish hockey.
Irish hockey, and you have to be able to capitalise on the success. So Irish hockey maybe need to look and say, right, do we have enough development officers? If we get a lot of parents asking us about getting their kids playing hockey, for example, like gymnastics can't keep up with the amount of people queuing to get into clubs. And it's a very good problem. They have massive numbers. Irish hockey just need to prepare themselves. And I often think people look at a success like this and they think, everyone will be queuing up to play hockey. Now, you still have to go out and recruit them. You still have to be quite aggressive, like the Katie Taylor effect, you might call it. You might get a bit of a spike for a while, but you need to have systems in place.
You have to have clubs that are able to take them, and you have to have coaches. Sinead, we've seen that in ladies Gaelic football, which is, you know, very large numbers, but the network is really huge to sustain that, isn't it?
I mean, within ladies Gaelic football, I know that they talked about kind of gradual improvements over the years, but it is still quite similar to what it was maybe 10 years ago. There's still, I'd say, similar number of clubs,
but it would be still way bigger than what hockey would have to feed into. That's absolutely. My point.
Well, with hockey, like you mentioned it before, the geographical problem, it's confined to the likes of Dublin, Cork, I think.
Dublin, Limerick, Cork and Belfast.
All the urban centres. There's interest in Galway, but the facilities maybe just aren't there. There are a couple of pitches, but there aren't as many as you would need. Around the middle of the country, it's sporadic enough. So it's hard to
linked a lot of the time for development.
The first time I ever saw a hockey stick would have been in PE, and it would have been uni hockey. It wasn't. There were no clubs in our locality, and that would have been not just within Longford, but it would probably be Roscommon.
There are hockey outposts.
You'd have to travel a good bit to get to it.
There's a club in Dungarvan. I went to school in St Augustine's College, which is the school of Niamh Briggs. That's right. And guess who was one of the best hockey players at the school?
Oisin.
Niamh Briggs.
There you go. I think you would say yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are outposts.
Good at all sports.
Exactly. But the thing is people will now start kind of making reactionary comments like, they need to capitalise on this. To be fair to any sporting organisation, that's very difficult to do because you have to mobilise a lot of people in a very short space of time.
And extremely difficult with what they have now, which is clearly a limited staff size, clearly limited marketing opportunities.
A very dedicated staff.
Very dedicated. But clearly limited. So you're right. Suddenly everyone expects this thing to be there and, we'll be able to bring our children down to hockey club. That won't necessarily happen, you're right. And the effect of also getting young people into clubs would be really interesting to see. How do you cope with that? How do you spread it? I thought it was really interesting. I was at the homecoming and there were boys and girls there, which was fantastic. A little boy in front of me with all of them. He had the jersey with all of their sponsorships on it, with their little sticks, you know, and I thought that was really interesting to see. And that crowd that came to the homecoming as well, we should say, was very mixed, male and female. There was just the Irish hockey family was there. It was a big family, but it could still be contained in half a Dame Street, and that's the challenge now for Irish hockey. One of the things that struck me was if they're looking for marketing things and marketing ideas, we're going to give them one here on Off the Bench, because the amount of people we saw tweeting saying we love those the razor style tops, their gear, right? Why not get that into shops? Why not get that market? If it was the FAI or the IRFU, that's the sort of stuff that would be happening straight away. They'd be selling jerseys on the back of it. And
very importantly, they have players and a coach who are willing to engage in the media. They're willing to show personality. They're willing to actually tell us something about themselves, and they're not suspicious of the media. Like, look, I understand why. Did
you notice that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've known it all the way along. One thing that irritates me about GA is it's very hard to get access to players between games. Monaghan would be an exception in the fact that, you know, after a game you can literally ask any of the players for an interview and they'll say yes or no, but it's their decision, not anyone else's decision.
No manager or anybody else.
And I think that's important for all sports, because most people who play elite sport, any elite sport, are capable of giving an interview. As Babs Keating used to say, if a guy can't give an interview, then he's no business playing inter-county. But he also clarified, if they don't want to do it, that's fine. That's fine. But they have so many people who can do it. They've got great ambassadors. And that is something they can...
And I think, Sinead, you probably were, as journalists, we noticed that it was their openness to work with the media, to deal with the media, to say, no, we can't. But there wasn't an automatic suspicion of the media. And also, it's something we say about women's sport all the time, because their stories haven't been told yet a lot of the time. Their stories are amazing.
Yeah, and that would be across the board, because they haven't been stung. You know, and a lot of times, a lot of male players, they'll have... they'll have given an interview, they'll have put the phone down and thought it was fine, and the next thing they'll see a misleading headline, and that will colour your view of journalists thereafter, and you won't be as
but I don't think that's all to blame. I think it's managers making them all paranoid about what they say in front of journalists.
That's culturally, definitely. That's developed, and I'm not saying that's linked back to any one particular incident. That's kind of developed over time, but kind of more within certain incidents, or anecdotally, the odd player might have had a bad experience with it, and they're just less engaging with them.
Did you notice that?
That hasn't happened with this group, because they're so new to it. And there's none of that.
But they're smart as well.
Their managers are completely willing to say, look, you're adults, and I'm going to leave it to you to decide.
And they've also said, and Graham Shaw, the manager, also said, we feel it's our duty actually to take this opportunity to spread the word for Irish hockey. You know, we feel that we're in this position now. Let's do this stuff.
There's no reason not to. This is a brilliant occasion. It's totally win-win. We want to celebrate what you've achieved. They want to celebrate what they've achieved. So you can work together. There's no reason why you'd have to be suspicious of the media when you're just spreading a good message after.
And they're smart enough to know who to avoid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
you can see the signs.
I always say that if players are good enough to play for their country, they're usually intelligent enough to deal intelligently with the media. But sometimes people put the handle on them and say, "Oh, don't talk and don't." I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was very interesting. I thought there were two other things that were interesting. One, they weren't judged against their male equivalents, because most of us have never seen men's hockey, so they were just judged on their own skills and their own bravery and their own just doggedness. So everyone said, "Oh my God, they're brilliant." They weren't going, "Oh, well, they're good, but they're not good compared to the men." And the second thing was that constant smile on their faces, and that all comes from that lack of pressure.
That's a great point, and I think it's something that is evolving. I used to get really frustrated when I'd watch ladies football or camogie, and I'd see pundits saying that's as good as any men's game, or that would compare with any football match or hurling match. It used to really annoy me, because you take the sports on their merits. You take an event as an event, and I think it's a great point that you've raised there about people just judging it for it being the sport it is and them being the team they are, rather than comparing it to something. And I think it's good that the sport itself is taking a life of its own and doesn't have to be justified against other sports. I think that's fantastic, and I think we're beginning to see a bit of that as well in camogie and ladies football over the last couple of years. The games are brilliant for themselves. They're not brilliant compared to something else. You don't have to compare them. You don't.
Another thing on the relationship between this hockey team and the media, Graham Shaw was giving interviews during the games and nearly after each quarter,
which is amazing to see.
It was a great dynamic. There was no frustration on his face. He was happy to do it, despite the huge pressure, because I don't know, the team obviously would have had a certain amount of expectation of themselves and a vision of how far they could go, but I don't know if anybody saw them getting as far as they got, because suddenly they're in a quarter final and it's on RTE, suddenly they're in a semi final and it's on RTE,
and it's amazing. It's the same with rugby as well, and even League of Ireland football, when it's shown on RTE and Air Sport, they have that kind of access. It makes me laugh because it reminds me of a conversation a couple of years ago about GA managers not wanting sideline reporters on the sideline, just in case the reporters heard what they were saying and heard their plans. It's like, we can see what you're shouting at your players, we can see what you're planning. So yeah, the access is pretty amazing, and I hope that continues.
And so say all of us, definitely.